After 3 weeks, we're nearly a fifth of the way into the 2023 WNBA season. On today's show, we're going to dive into 3 different teams' outlooks, both this year and into the future, now that we have a sense of their directions, plus a victory lap for longtime listeners of this show. This Saturday edition of Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
McLellan for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Welcome. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. My name is Emma Adler, and I'm a WNBA columnist and features writer league-wide, in addition to leading our written coverage of draft scouting and player development. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. You may be wondering where the dulcet tones of Hunter Cruz have gone. He's busy covering the Atlanta Dream twice in 3 days. But I'm still joined by our regular co-host Lynx and Shafer, an indispensable part of our scouting team. You can follow him at Dovienya, that's at DOVIENYA_ on Twitter, and you can find stuff from myself, him, and Hunter all at thenexthoops.com. Lincoln, so in recent days, I had a piece published at The Next about a couple teams rebuilding. You could say that they are tanking. I think part of that piece was to say whether or not I think that that's an accurate term for that. But I'm interested in your takes, given what you've seen this season, on both Seattle and Minnesota's approaches to their rebuilds, and whether you think we're getting good looks at, different players who deserve a spot or a different look in this league.
Yeah, Seattle and Minnesota are kind of in the same place where they lost a whole bunch of talent from their teams in the last few years. For Seattle, obviously, Sue Bird and Breanna Stewart retiring and leaving for New York. And in Minnesota, you lose Sylvia Fowles, who's been your franchise cornerstone. You lose Maya Moore to retirement. And, those kind of approaches, you're going to end up in the same kind of situation. But they definitely have different approaches. Seattle is taking more swings on second draft players, taking second and third year players, and taking them and building around their current infrastructure, their core that they view as what could be the core of the next great Seattle team, with Jewel Lloyd and Ezzie Magwegor, who are both incredibly talented and do a lot of great things. And then I think that the difference between the two in a big part is that Seattle has a stronger core there. I don't think it would be controversial to say that Jewel Lloyd is a better overall player than the best player on Minnesota's roster, which is likely Nafisa Collier at this point. But Seattle has an interesting mix of veterans and really young players that they are giving minutes to, and I think they're also rostering more rookies and second-year players than Minnesota by a significant margin, which is definitely going to change the way that you approach team building and the way that you approach the season as a whole.
Yeah, I don't know how many of Seattle's most recent games you've caught, but they have been giving a lot more minutes lately to a lot of those young players talking about, especially the rookies. Dulcie Fankett-Menciado, the rookie big out of USF, has gone from basically playing at all to getting a solid couple 5-minute runs in the past couple games. But I think most notably Jordan Horston, obviously the rookie out of Tennessee, who I will talk about later in the show, has basically just steadily had her minutes increase as the season has gone on. She is showcasing one of the most versatile skill sets in the W already. The things that they're able to do with her, the things that she is finding spots for, is pretty incredible. But I think what's really stood out, but to us that may have gone a little under the radar, is the minutes Jade Melbourne is getting and the minutes that Ivana Dojkic is getting. I for one, we'll talk about Ivana Dojkic for a second. I've been super impressed by her time. She is basically a 6-foot wing. She played for Virtus Bologna this past year, maybe the past couple years in Euroball. She is a Serbian 25-year-old rookie for the WNBA, and really not too much older than most players who would be sort of at the tail end of their rookie contract. So still very much in her prime. She played mostly point guard in Europe, but appears to, for Seattle, be more of a wing. And she's showcased some really interesting flashes of passing in the pick and roll. She looks like a hell of a three-point threat off the dribble, even if the shots, all of them aren't falling. She's got a really quick trigger release there in a way that is sort of reminiscent of if sort of Sammy Whitcomb had a little less off the catch and a little more off the dribble with a little more size. But one thing I've been really impressed by is especially her defense. She is, for the past couple of games, she's basically forced Seattle head coach Noel Quinn to kind of bench Kia Nurse in much longer stretches than they were planning on playing her, just because Kia Nurse has screwed up some rotations in the defensive end, and Ivana Dojkic is really good at using her length, really good at getting in positions, and really seems to understand space. So I think this is the kind of player that you're looking for when you are going into taking a step back now to take a step forward later, the way that Seattle and Minnesota are doing. And this is what you want to come away with. This is what you have a chance to swing for the fences on, because you can roster a bunch of players like this and see what they can do. And I don't think that there's another team in the W that was going to give Dojkic within her first 6 games was going to give her 20 minutes a game and you can see what we're getting.
Yeah, the rotations for Seattle have been interesting. Jewel Lloyd and Ezzy are the only players that play more than 24 minutes per game on that team right now, which is remarkable to have that many players in their rotation that are playing. They have 10 players that have played at least 40 minutes this season, which I haven't looked closely, but I would wager that that's the most in the WNBA right now. But just having so many options and so many ways to put different lineups out there. You can play all veterans. You can play all young players. They played a couple lineups with 4 rookies on the floor in their last couple games. And that's just going to give you fun basketball, because those 4 rookies are a really interesting group with a lot of really good passers at their positions. I am one of the biggest fans of Jade Melbourne in the world. She is such a creative player offensively who she sees windows and angles that very few people see. And I think that we agree that one of the reasons that we rated Jordan Horston so highly in the pre-draft process was her passing vision and the way that she sees the court at 6'2" with her length and her size. It's really a special thing for her. And to combine that with the veteran talent of Jewel Lloyd and Ezzy Magdalor, you're going to get really interesting things happening on the court almost all the time. Even if it doesn't end up in wins, I'm sure that Seattle is very intrigued and pretty pleased with the way that their season has gone so far.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting looking at Minnesota, because Minnesota obviously, like you mentioned, doesn't give the same volume to a number of players at the same age. They're playing a lot of mostly known quantities, but they're still decently young by WNBA standards. Their biggest minutes getter is Jess Shepard. Jess Shepard, I believe, is around 26. They're giving pretty large minutes on a per game basis, not so much on a flat rate because of injury, but on a per game basis, they're pretty good. They're giving pretty big minutes to Diamond Miller. They finally come around to giving more minutes to Dorka Juhas. And, these aren't the same players that Seattle is going to be. Just in terms of age, we have rookies that are more known quantities. We've seen them more in college, or we've seen them more, or these are non-rookies that were already basically on their second contract. But I think it's interesting that the two teams basically are playing. Their average weighted age is about the same, but they've gone about this in very different ways, just in terms of who is playing. And I wonder what you think, how much value you're getting out of the looks that Minnesota is giving to some of these players, independent of the minutes they're giving to the rookies. Tiffany Mitchell looks the best that she ever has in the W. I mean, she looks like a genuine all-star. Rachel Banham finally moving to an off-ball role. Jessica Shepard getting a little more run. I mean, I think this is showing us things that just as fans of the WNBA, we want to see. I'm wondering how much value you think that brings just to an organization.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy between Seattle and Minnesota when you're seeing how Minnesota is trying to take players that maybe have been in the WNBA longer, like Tiffany Mitchell, like Jess Shepard, and trying to see if they can maximize their skill sets instead of taking swings on younger players who may not have the same kind of track record. That's going to be interesting. I think that the flashes that they've gotten out of Shepard and Tiffany Mitchell especially have been really interesting, but I don't know if it's the way that I would approach team building, especially for a team that Cheryl Reeve has said is in a rebuild. Like they're approaching this season with more of a long-term view than we need to win 55% of our games and get the 5 seed, the 4 seed, and try to win a playoff series. And a lot of that comes back to their preseason roster decisions where they let two promising, interesting-looking rookies walk away and left their roster more unchanged than Seattle. Seattle had a lot more roster turnover than Minnesota. As you see, like the top 3 minute getters for Minnesota are all returning players from their team last year, just in expanded roles. And I think that that's one of the big differences. I'm not sure how much value you're really getting out of seeing these more established players in this different context, especially in a long-term sense.
Yeah. And I think the thing that complicates it a little bit as well is, when you're doing this kind of rebuild in the men's NBA, or if you're doing it in baseball, in MLB, you often want to look for veterans who you think you can get more production from or prove that there's still something left in a way that other teams haven't been doing because, they're contending and so they don't have the ability to take risks. And if you hit on someone, but you hit on one of these veteran players before you hit your stage in the cycle of winning, where you're actually gunning for playoff spots again, then what you can really do to energize the rebuild is you flip those players. It's basically like buying a house and flipping it. You see something that other people don't. You think you can get a good return out of the investment because you're in a different timeline. So you repair, you rebuild, and you flip for positive value. The issue in the W is because of the limited roster spots and because of
The cap.
because of salaries across the league being relatively more constrained relative to other leagues, just the range within them, there's a lot less room to maneuver them into. But I mean, like with teams like Dallas, with teams like Atlanta, people who want to make the playoffs and theoretically would have room for, I don't know, Tiffany Mitchell would probably fit on both teams. You have room, I think, for them to flip them, but it's a lot harder to get this value out of them. And, I think there is some strength in what Minnesota has done there if they can do that. But I think that's a really big if, and I think that's a big issue there. And I think that also really reflects on sort of, if you're not going to be able to do what Seattle's doing, and, you don't have someone of Nafisa Collier's scalability and her age, and you're a little farther ahead with your best player's timeline in terms of your contention. But again, you can't really do the Seattle thing in terms of just accruing assets and young players. Then we get to what I think is interesting about these two teams is comparing them to what James Wade has done in Chicago. I mean, over the offseason, you and I were both among the many, many people who were looking at Chicago and going, why are you trying so hard to be the 5th seed, and why are you mortgaging your future just to be the 5th seed for a few years? And I don't think either of us think that Chicago is an actual title contender this year. I mean, I don't think most teams are. I don't think more than 2 or 3 teams are title contenders right now, just given the Mystics' offense is in comparison to the Las Vegas everything. But Chicago's looked great. Chicago has looked, I mean, most importantly, they've been really fun. Has that changed your opinion at all?
My opinion on their ceiling or their process, because I don't think that my view of their ceiling has really changed. I think they're still probably, the ceiling is like maybe they can win a playoff series, but they're kind of doing a supercharged version of what Minnesota is doing by taking these more established players and putting them into a different, better context. And one of the ways that really is showing up for me on the stat sheet is that Courtney Williams, Marina Mabry, and Dana Evans, their 3 primary ball handlers, are all at career highs in both assist percentage and assists per game right now. And so their kind of ball handler by committee is working to a degree that I didn't see coming. I don't think very many people did see that kind of passing growth from those 3 players specifically. Is a really interesting way to see how James Wade has built this team, and it's a huge credit to his coaching ability to get these players that may have been cast-offs or slightly devalued assets in other situations and other teams, to get them to play at a higher level, like someone like Alana Smith, who struggled with injuries and the ability to stay on the court in Phoenix for a couple of years, has looked like a genuine positive value rotation player in Chicago this season. And part of that is because she's hitting all of her jump shots right now. But even outside of making all of her shots, she's looked like a solid rotation player who brings value to this team defensively and offensively.
She's been able to fill gaps and work in space in a way that she hasn't shown since maybe not even at Stanford, frankly.
Yeah.
It's been really impressive.
Yeah, and that's also a credit to James Wade, scouting Europe and scouting Australia, scouting other professional leagues, and finding players like Rebecca Gardner and Morgan Birch, and seeing things that players may not have even seen in themselves, and being able to translate that skill set into the WNBA.
The thing that I want to ask about in terms of team building here is, how do I phrase this? Chicago is locked into this roster basically, and I don't want to say locked in because it makes it sound like it's a negative thing, but Chicago is basically committed to the current roster construction for the foreseeable future. Basically, everyone in their rotation is under contract for next year, or is very likely to continue being on that team for not a very large raise. Kalia Copper, Courtney Williams, and Alana Smith are really the only unrestricted free agents on the team. And, given their current pay levels, I don't think any of them, maybe Courtney Williams, but I don't think any of them should really be expected to get significant raises over their current salaries, at least as a percent of the WNBA cap. Their salaries will rise. Everyone's salary rises as the WNBA cap rises. But, I think, I think that's the key there. Is it, I think we can often lose the forest for the trees when it comes to tanking discourse, when it comes to thinking about rebuilding. Is there something to be said for a team like Chicago going out there and being able to maximize a roster like this and being able to just be a competitive team, if not one with huge title hopes for, a good number of years?
Yeah, I think they're really fun and they're really competitive and they can beat anybody on any night. And that is that what sports is about? Like, it kind of is. It's a philosophical question of, is the only thing that you can do try to win a title? Or is it a success for a team that maybe some people projected even outside the playoffs to be the 4 seed, the 5 seed, and really give one of the really like the quote unquote super teams a real run in the second round of the playoffs? Would that be considered a success because it's exceeding the expectations that we had for them? Or do they have to make a finals run or win a championship? I think that this team is a success because it's fun and it's competitive already. And just seeing the way that this team clearly has a lot of fun playing basketball together is awesome to watch. And it's a really interesting team. And that's one of the things that I love about sports is you take this plucky underdog team and just watch them play really hard and play a fun brand of basketball.
Yeah, you play 40 regular season games in the WNBA, and if you're lucky, you play maybe 10 playoff games. There's a big difference in what you're giving fans and what you're giving your players as an experience if you can just be this competitive in the regular season. So
absolutely.
Now, to close us out, I want to talk about Jordan Horston for a minute. Heading into the draft, everyone on the public side had her as a lottery pick. Pretty much everyone had her as the number 3, number 4 pick on their boards. Turns out most people on the industry side had her a little bit lower than that, considering she went 9th to Seattle, which the Storm were overjoyed about. General Manager Talisa Reyes said after the draft that in their war room, when they hit about pick 6 or 7, they looked at their board and they looked at how the draft was going, and they started quietly like crossing their fingers and praying for Horston to keep dropping. And once it got to the 8th pick and a pick that was not Horston came in, the Seattle room started they started celebrating that Horston had fallen so far from where they had her that they were ultimately able to draft her. And the thing about Horston coming there was not just the fact that for Seattle that was to them a huge value. Someone that they had as a lottery talent was coming to them at that range. But not just that, for us here at the Next, we had her, and we're pretty much the only ones, as far as I saw, we were the only ones who had Horston at number 2. Everyone else pretty much had Dami Miller at number 2. We had Horston number 2. And a big part of that was not just about the upside for either of them, because for Dami Miller, Dami Miller's upside at 6'3" with her wingspan, with her athleticism, you don't get that kind of offense and that kind of length and that kind of disruption at the power forward spot that often. Or if you're trying to play a more versatile, more skilled ball player, even at the 3, she has the athleticism to hang there. But we had concerns about her defense in the same way we had concerns about Jordan Horston shooting. Whether Jordan Horston's size could fit in at the WNBA, considering, Dami Miller has a lot more bulk to her, even though Jordan Horston probably has about the same length of wingspan. But for us, it was, they both were pretty high-risk lottery picks in terms of hitting a sort of all-star caliber upside. And there might have been more downside risk with Horston. But the thing for us was, if neither of them hit the real upper bounds of their potential, then they're both probably people you're not giving big minutes to on a contender. So if one of them is more likely to be a 30 future value, someone who can bounce around from roster to roster in the 10th, 11th person spot, if one of them's like that, one of them is just out of the league, really, what's the difference? And so then for us, it came down to what are the odds of hitting that upside? And I think Horston had a better shot of hitting her outside, and I think my co-host would really agree. That's why we had her where we had her. And I think for a lot of people, you look at her college years and what she's done. And for me, when I was watching her junior year, I was honestly pretty quickly out on her. I had watched her sophomore year, obviously, watched her junior year. And there's so much to love, but there was so much issue around the turnovers and around the inopportune shot selection, we'll call it. And there wasn't a lot of faith there on my side, I'm going to be honest. And then we get to this year. You get Tamari Key getting injured early on and having to miss the year. And suddenly Jordan Horston with a little bit more opening in the paint, with a little bit more of having teammates who are stretching the defense and commanding the defense more. She's played alongside first and WNBA picks before, but no one who was really able to move and command defensive attention quite like Rakia Jackson was last year. And once you have a center who's not just paint bound, when they're playing Carolyn Striplin, who was able to take threes, you're playing Jasmine Franklin, and you're going a little more small ball. Jasmine Franklin is often operating on the elbows, or is at least moving in the mid-range more. It opens some stuff up, and you had her taking a lot of floaters, and her floater was pretty elite, and you had her operating in space where the turnovers got way down, and all of a sudden it's, here's someone who is 6'2", and who is possibly the best defender in the country, and is, at this point, a versatile offensive weapon, still decently inefficient, but efficient just enough to sort of hit a threshold where we can say, this is someone who, we can see it breaking right. We had her second. Seattle had her pretty high. I'm not going to assume it was higher than Diamond Miller. I don't think I have no reason to believe anyone in the industry necessarily had her higher than Diamond Miller. But after a slow start for Horston in Seattle, she has really, really started to vindicate this ranking. I mean, she so far has played 6 games, and the numbers by themselves don't jump off the page. But over the past 2 games, partly because of injury and partly because of how well she's adapting to learning the schemes, how hard she's working in Seattle, the coaches can't, and her teammates really as well, especially Jewel Boyd and Agbegor, can't stop raving about her. She's earned 26, 27 minutes each of the past 2 nights. The count numbers don't jump off the page. Last night she only went 4 for 13 from the field, but a lot of that was having to get up tough shots in the fourth quarter because Seattle was trailing and trying to make this hard comeback, and she was trusted to basically play the entire fourth quarter and most of it alongside their nominal starters and their best players. And if you take out the shots that she missed in that fourth quarter, because again, you're pushing and you're not as much within the rhythm of the offense, just trying to lead that comeback. Over these past 3 games, she shot 48% from the field. And for a rookie who's 6'2", sort of a tweener between small forward and power forward, for someone who is having to take on the level of defensive usage that she has, let alone her offensive usage as well, in the different ways they're using her, in the wide multitude of shots she has to take, that's pretty remarkable. Last night she had 2 of 5 from 3. This is, we're not betting on her to become a plus or probably even an average 3-point shooter in her career. It's certainly possible, but just to being able to have nights like those and this early into her career is really impressive. Like I said, the counting numbers don't jump off the page, but if you look at her per 36 minutes, again, through 6 games in her WNBA career, 12 points, 9.3 rebounds. That is pretty crazy for again, someone who's playing alongside teams that's playing 3 centers for the whole game. And she's still getting almost a double-double per 36. 2.5 assists. She's high in turnovers, but 2.5 assists for a player, again, at her position. She's not playing point. She's not playing combo guard even. She has 3.1 steals, 1.6 blocks, and only 2.8 fouls, again, per 36 minutes. Like I said, the turnovers are high. The shooting percentages haven't been great until the past few games. This is what you expect of a rookie, and the process is so there. It's remarkable that a player, again, who is this young, a player who is only this many games into their season, is able to do so many things. She's been a roller. She's been a screener. She's been operating on the short roll. She's been hitting excellent passes. She's been a league-out option. These are all things on the offensive end and the putbacks as well. The defensive end, at this point, Seattle is basically asking everyone who isn't a center or who isn't a point of attack guard to be doing pretty much anything they can do, and she's just been wonderful. Again, you can see it in those stock numbers. It's crazy. And, we've had a lot of pretty impressive rookies from the first round this year. Haley Jones, her athleticism is starting to really pop the past couple games, and she's been able to get to some spots in the way that she wasn't early on. Letitia Meaher just had a wonderful game. Aaliyah Boston is already, I would say, top 7, 6 center. I haven't really counted off the top of my head, but I would say she's been a borderline top 5 center in the league already, which is remarkable. Diamond Miller, and I think this is the thing that we're looking at here is when it comes to who's the second best rookie that we can project forward. I still think it's Horston. I thought it was Horston going into the draft. I still think it's Horston. Diamond Miller, the athleticism is wonderful, and I think there are big things in her future. The fluidity and the coordination she's shown off the bounce has been incredibly impressive already in ways that we were concerned about coming out of Maryland, and the Lynx have done an incredible job developing her in that sense and getting her to a place where she's so much more fluid and things are moving so much easier. And it's made her game off the bounce and her pull-up jumper a lot better than they were at Maryland. But at this point, she's still doing that thing where she finishes all of her layups with a scoop. And I don't know how you're going to fix that. I mean, I know how you would fix that. You would get some overhand finishing in, but that's a hard fix, I think. And players don't usually have that kind of approach where they kind of have to finish everything underhand. If Minnesota can fix that, then there's something brewing there, and that's going to be impressive to see. But for now, I mean, it's a lot easier to see Jordan Horston's sort of floaters and close range touch jumpers that go in and out only going in. It's a lot easier to see that than to see Miller be able to flip her hand on all of her finishes, because right now she's having some trouble finishing, and it's something we saw at Maryland, and she was able to make up for that with calls. But there were a lot of and ones that she should have had that turned into shoot 2 shots at the line. And when she can't do that in the WNBA, then a lot of those should be and ones or just should be layups are going to turn into misses. They have so far. And I'm concerned about that going forward. But, again, she's looked impressive nonetheless. But Jordan Horston, real standout through 6 games. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. Make your second listen the Locked On podcast for your favorite team. And join us next week at Locked On Women's Basketball when we'll come back and cover from Monday through Friday and Saturday, possibly. We will be covering the whole WNBA, women's college basketball, and more.